Hello, everyone. Dr. Christine Smith back for a wonderful interview for you today with Dr. Sean Drake, who is known as the Athlete's Doctor. And we have known each other for a number of years and incredible professional for seeing customized care for elite athletes. Hello, Dr. Drake. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. I was just telling everyone a little bit about you and just how you kind of have this gift for seeing custom care in athletes, from anything from fascial lines to particular muscle imbalances to a whole bunch of different pre and post care that you use. And I'd love if you could just tell everyone a little bit about your history and all the amazing athletes you've worked with and how you fell in love with this niche.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think we just got to start out with Bill Bowerman. He's always said that if you have a body, you're an athlete, and I thoroughly believe that my whole life. And so, I often get looked at as like the athlete's doctor, and I get to work with some amazing, pro athletes and all these people. But I do want to make this very serious about my passion is, the human soul and allowing people to, break through their limited, possibilities. And so, I fell into this niche again. Growing up as an athlete, unfortunately, had a pretty bad car accident, derailed me, and what I thought I was going to do, and ended up at Life University and did their master's in sports injury management, and worked, with their rugby team during my master's, and traveled. And through that, as we have this conversation today, we're going to talk about a lot of cool things we've been able to do. But the spectrum goes all the way from extreme sports, nitro circus, do tour, snowboard and ski and skateboarding, all the way to professional baseball, professional golf, into gymnastics, weekend warriors. So as we shape this conversation, I think it's really important to understand that, when we're looking at a human, we're trying to figure out, okay, what is their goal and what are they trying to accomplish? And then number two, how do we build the right team around them? And I think that takes a special, practitioner to say, okay, this is what I'm good at. How do I build my team around me with other practitioners so that way we can make that person the most efficient and they can perform the best?
Absolutely. And I think the team aspect, I mean, just like any sport, right? The team aspect of having your healthcare team, it matters. And like, you can't always get everything from one source. And that collaboration and feeling supported from all sides, I think, is a part of the healing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, in all this, like, what kind of care do you find yourself doing most in office for like optimal performance in these top tier athletes?
I think number one's assessment. I always come down to that. I think, obviously when you look at your functional medicine world, you're going to do an assessment, you're going to take blood work, you're going to look at hormones, you're going to look at all these things. From my side, I'm like, all right, well, number one, what are they trying to accomplish? So if we're working with a, a pro pitcher or a pro hitter in baseball, number one, I'm going to put them through an on-base U hitting screen or pitching screen. I want to see, okay, what are their physical limitations and what they're trying to accomplish? Number two, I'm going to look at the nervous system. I think nervous system is a massive thing, and in the way that I've been blessed to kind of be with some of the great minds around breath work and modalities, and we'll talk about that throughout this call. The nervous system is a big one to me because a lot of times we can push. If we're not able to regulate our nervous system and actually like get into our subconscious and figure out what our most authentic being is trying to accomplish, we have a fight. And then through that assessment, we look at physical. What are their past history? I think it's always important to take a really detailed history, because the number one predictor of injury is previous injury that hasn't been properly rehabbed or focused on. So often we'll get guys or ladies that come in the clinic and they have a certain issue, and next thing I know, we're going through their history, and maybe they've had a rolled ankle in the lower body, or they've had a surgery that they didn't talk to somebody about, or they had a gallbladder out, or next thing you know, you've got fascial adhesions that are affecting. It's kind of like an emergency brake. So all of a sudden, the body's put this like trauma response on to hold, and now it's like, okay, well, I don't want to perform because I've got this past stuff in my body that's restricting me. So we've got to go there, and then taking them into what opportunities might be able to be taken care of. So and that could be through working fascia, that could be working, an adjustment through the, skeletal system, that could be working DC current, using it like, a device such as Newbie or NewFit to, actually reset that nervous system, using PMF, pulse electromagnetic field therapy. So now we're actually getting energy into the body. To red light, looking at like how can we have photo biomodulation, sauna, cold exposure. A lot of times it's a big topic right now when you're looking at, performance. It's like, okay, well, what does cold exposure do? And we'll talk about how I look at that during this call. And then blood flow restriction, throwing blood flow restriction in there. That with cryotherapy, using a Vasper, or maybe you want to use B Strong, or you're using, another device like Delphi. And then having training, systems that you can actually do post care to create a better motor pattern. So if you're using something like a Proteus, or Extrafly, or a flywheel, or something, to where you're actually getting that nervous system to do what it needs to do, or a synapse to where you can do eccentric loading. So you've got to really look at, okay, what's the limitation? How can we correct that physical limitation if it's physical? Then how do we create a motor pattern? And then how do we talk with our coaches and say, look, this is what they can and can't do, and let's build a system around them so that way we can make them, continue to grow and continue to become a better athlete while we're in, obviously they're in our care.
Absolutely. And I love I'm going to go back a couple steps because you made so many good points. One of them was that like you got injured and went through this whole process of getting your body back, which I went through my own version of that. And I think at some point, everyone usually goes through some kind of bit of that in their life. And one of the things that doesn't get talked about, especially when you are an athlete and it's like your entire identity comes from your ability to move well, that kind of thing can be a complete identity crisis. And I think people don't always discuss that, and that can actually lead to nutritional deficiencies because people forget when you get injured, you actually get some leaky gut, and then it can go into this inflammatory cycle. And then if you're in like a sub level of inflammation, you can start to get injured more easily. And that's how sometimes you'll get injured and then you'll get a whole bunch. And it's that concept of like when it rains, it pours, but also it's tied into the fact that your body is working with its immune system, and therefore your tissue integrity is not as good as it was when you're not in that state, which is why everything that you just listed, all those different modalities, are all forms of recovery. And I think helping people understand how to do proper recovery in their body, which is not just like sitting and watching TV and relaxing, it requires like entering the body into a certain state. All of those I think are amazing. And I know breathwork is one of your favorites. Let's dive in a little bit and talk about just kind of the breathwork practices that you use, how you use them in your life, how you use them for your athletes, like how to use it pre and post game, and then we can kind of dive into some of those other modalities in the same way.
Yeah, I'm continuing to go down this world of breathwork. I think it's a really big deal. And a lot of times when people are looking at breathwork right now, they're looking at it from like a somatic release standpoint, or they're looking at like, hey, we're trying to release trauma. And that's a phenomenal way of looking at it. And then you've got this other side that's like, hey, let's go, Wim Hof, very heavy, very intense. Let's go ahead and get the nervous system into a certain area. You've got everything from holotropic to, yoga breaths. And so breathing has been around for, millions and millions of years. Obviously we're alive because we're breathing. But what I continue to find is that, number one, you've got to find out where that individual is in front of you. And you got to say, okay, are they in a hyper state or a hypo state? And there's different ways to attack that. So if I've got a guy that's in a very high state of stress, or, cortisol, or they're trying, they're getting ready to play a playoff game. And I had this happen during the World Series with one of my guys. He, calls me up. He's like, do I need to talk? I was like, we can be there to get hands on. So I'm like, all right, what's the one tool that I know I can use with him right now that I can get him to be able to calm down, change that pattern interruption, and say, okay, cool, let's get you back into a flow state. Let's get you into like a calm state. So from that one, my thing is, okay, let's get the breath down. It's rate, right? So let's take a longer breath. So breathing in the nose, out the nose. It's gonna be more of a breath of meditation, calming, non-reaction, for focus. And so we're trying to get them into that state. So 6 seconds out through the nose, as they breathe in, really kind of compressing the spine and the belly button together, getting the chest expanded, getting the neck opened up, and having that air come up and then going back out. And so by doing that, now we can actually say, okay, we can get that nervous system back onto, a right regulation. And then we can do some induction. So, trying to get that trauma response out, like what's triggering that athlete or that person that's trying to go accomplish something. So we can use contractions. So we can have them, squeeze their hands as they breathe in and try to relax or sigh on the way out. Then you can start, then what we do is after we got some induction going on, now the nervous system's relaxed, the body's relaxed. okay, what's the biggest thing that's like holding you back right now? And so you try to bring some communication into that breath work. And so as they're breathing, they're thinking about it. And then what I can do is say, okay, so is it all the fans? Is it the stress? Is it the media? Is it, the fact that you're about to, play game six of the World Series? And if it is, what we can do is say, okay, this is the first time you've ever felt this. And this is really important, just like when we work with our athletes or we're looking at blood work, we're like, is this the first time you've had this trigger response? Or is this the first time you've had this situation come up? And oftentimes they're going to say, no, this is, if we can get back to the original portion and that original situation that gave them that stress and that trigger and that response, now we can take that breath work and now we can start to recenter that brain, that pattern, that nervous system and say, okay, well, let's reframe this. And so now we can change from like a 6-6 to maybe a 4-8. So now we bring in 4, we go out 8, going a little slower, taking a little deeper. Good. All right, great. Now what we can do is now once they've got that and they have that joy, they have that feel, they have that excitement inside their body, now we can take it into a hyper. So now we can get them to breathe like a puppy breath, like get that nervous system back into regulation and then get them to go play. So what's cool is that through breath work, you can really start to, it's almost like playing a piano, right? You've got all these different keys and, oftentimes we love to play certain keys over here. It's like, no, I'm comfortable over here. I'm okay with this stress response. I'm okay with this situation. And then you have all these beautiful keys over here, but we don't know how to use them. So as we start to play those, now we can really work within our nervous system and getting them to like, okay, as they're breathing, they're smiling, they're having, fun, putting some music, start to take that music and move their energy. And then so that's like an athlete that's getting ready to go perform. Well, if you've got an athlete that had an ACL tear, well, okay, maybe we've got to get them out of that mindset of the tear and get them back to their focus and their goals. So I might put them on some PMF and change up the frequency. And so we're charging the body as we're taking them in. And then from a group setting, I think it's really important to understand that your breath, your body's breathing you. Oftentimes we think that we're breathing the body, but as we start to connect with this consciousness and this energy and this light, now your body really becomes the tool. So it's breathing you. And so it infects your environment, affects the energy around you, what you're going to accomplish. And that's quantum physics, and you and I both know from Bruce Lipton and other people that we've worked with, that, the epigenetic component of athleticism is really where I'm kind of pushing that boundary right now. It's like, guys, okay, we've got to change how we've done things because we got to get back to like simplicity, right? Like what can these guys or ladies do on the road, or what can they do when they're at home? And that's really where the resilience comes into play that you talked about. Sorry, it's my dog. And so when I look at a group setting, because I think it's important to talk about these 3 different areas, right? So then when we have a group setting, now we have an epigenetic component, right? So when I teach breath work on Tuesday nights in my studio that I work at, or I do like private retreats and things like this with men or athletes, now we're bringing an environmental factor in. And so, you obviously want to take, the person through an induction. How do we get their body to relax? And DiMartino and a bunch of other, great people out there do great jobs at this. But like when you can induct the body and you can get the body relaxed, that's number 1. Let's get in that state. Then number 2, it's being able to bypass that amygdala brain, right? Like saying, okay, that reptilian, like, oh man, I got to survive. I'm just trying to do this stuff. And being able to actually get around that so that way they can say, holy cow, like what is my possibility? And then through using music, we can actually start to like take them on this like river and train, right? So, we can start and get them ramped up, get their heartbeat, into a good state, then bringing them down, then bringing them back up, then bringing them down. And through this, there's these, 3 types of breath that, I often teach: in the mouth, out the mouth. And that's going to be more of your excitation. That's like a lot of people talk about it as like most powerful breath. It's the breath that's going to take you deepest to where you want to go. And it really does. And then you have in the nose, out the mouth. And so this is going to be more for like the reflection, like, geometrical colors, like taking you into, a quantum side of it. And then you have, like we talked about a little bit ago, it's like if you're stressed or you have something going on inside the body that I'm trying to release, we're going to do more of an in the nose, out the nose. So now we get more into that relaxed state, focus, calm, non-reaction. And so if you start to understand these breaths, and I'm continuing to dive into it myself, is that now you can master your nervous system. If you can master the nervous system, Now we can take anything we want to do and just make it that much better. So if you're working with a functional medicine practitioner, now all of a sudden, you're doing breath work continually. We're changing that nervous system response. Well, now maybe that supplementation is going to be able to hear that much quicker, right? So the gut brain is going to calm down, the heart brain is going to calm down, the brain is going to calm down. Now we have the fascial brain. So I think breath work to me, I instill in everything that we do, because it's just one tool that I know that I can teach somebody. Like I had an athlete yesterday that had a major seizure a couple weeks ago. When I found out about, he's a young athlete, really stud kid, and I had to go to the hospital to visit him. Well, as a practitioner, we got to be really careful sometimes in a hospital setting when you're working with an athlete, because number one, you don't know the meds they're on. Adjusting them in there can be kind of a tricky thing depending on the charge nurse or the liability of the hospital. So the one tool that I had that I knew we could do was breath work, and it was cool to see. Like, he was having a hard time even, making full, sentences. And by the end of our breath work and our, 35, 40 minutes together, he was calm, he was light, he had light back in his eyes. So I don't think that we always have to rush to a physical, modality when we have this tool that we can really expand upon.
You said so many things that just made me so happy. I love how you compared the body to an instrument, because that's often how I will compare it for people. And I think it's actually a really important concept for athletes to understand, and to understand how to balance their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic is like, you need it to perform in your game. Like, it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. But if you're on all the time and you never quite enter that recovery state, you actually start to deplete yourself, and you can even break down your own muscles for fuel for your body. So the balance of bringing the parasympathetic up, I think, is how we really maintain things over time and have career longevity and have quality of life after a career. And these tools and understanding how to use them to change the volume or tighten the strings or loosen them, I think, is so important, because you kind of need the tight strings before you go out for the game, but you have to loosen them in order to recover from something like an injury or like a seizure, anything like you were just talking about. And seizure activity is interesting because it's usually hyperstimulation of the nervous system along with a bunch of other things. So if we can start to really control the nervous system, which is exactly what you're talking about, is basically how I even got into body work. I used to work in research and cognitive neuroscience and psych labs and studying the brain. And then I had someone do body work to me that completely transformed my nervous system, and was so curious that I went down a whole different career path. And learning these things and learning how to apply them is invaluable. And the other thing I find the most interesting about breath is it's the first thing that we do when we come into this world. So if you want to connect with an energy significantly bigger than yourself, I think it is your primary tool to do that, because it is the thing. It's kind of like that little portal between worlds. And the different types of breath work that you're talking about, that's why I wanted to bring him on to talk about this stuff and talk about these therapies, because I think a lot of people think about them like, oh, breath work, oh, cold plunge, oh, heat. But understanding their diversity and how to use them properly and time them correctly is like a whole other field of study. And that's the essentially biohacking. Like, we're talking about different forms of biohacking and how to really learn how to manage and have complete control over your own body through these tools that you can do on your own. And so with that, like, I'd love if you could also talk about some of these other tools. Like you mentioned PEMF and putting energy into the body. And with that, I often think about mitochondria and helping stimulation. And then, there's also things like hyperbaric and cold plunge and infrared sauna and the red light that you were talking about. And I'll kind of touch on them like a little bit from my perspective, and then I'd love for you to dive deeper. So he's talking about PEMF. For anyone who doesn't know, pulsed electromagnetic field, it's basically putting a magnetic field into the body, changing the charge of the cells and changing their cellular function. And red light therapy, kind of a similar thing, also really good for lowering inflammation. Infrared sauna, great for heating muscles, great for recovery, blood flow, detoxing the body, all of that. And then cold plunge, it can also be good for lowering inflammation, can be good for stimulating the nervous system, can also be good for training resiliency. But there's like little things about it where, it depends on your goals. Like, if your goal is to build muscle, you might not want a cold plunge right after you do that, because you actually need the inflammation a little bit to build some of the muscle, and then doing it later to mitigate any additional excess inflammation can be a really good way to use it. Or you can use it earlier in the day before a game to kind of stimulate the system. And then hyperbaric is like hyperbaric oxygen therapy. It's like the pressurized oxygen chamber. That can be amazing, and it has epigenetic changes as well, which I think a lot of people don't realize. But it's hyperoxygenating the cells, and the oxygen is one component of the therapy, and then the other component is the pressure. They actually have two different effects. They can turn on genes, they can turn off genes, they can get rid of infection, it can stimulate healing. And obviously none of this is medical advice. Always speak with your practitioner about what's right for you. But we want you to know about these therapies and that they exist, because there's so much that you can do. And the other piece that you brought up that I thought was so important about the nervous system that a lot of people don't know is that if your nervous system is overstimulated and kind of that fight or flight, or like where you were when you're in the middle of the game and you just kind of never quite totally came back down. I like to tell people, like, a really good way to tell if you're in this state is like if someone slams a door and you kind of jump, or if you close your eyes and you can't quite hold your eyelids still. That's a really good way to know that you're kind of in that hyper stimulated nervous system state. And if you're in that state, especially if there was like an injury during the game or you took a really hard hit, it actually can put your cells into what's called a cellular danger response, where they all kind of like stiffen up and they're not really in a state to absorb nutrients. So you can pound all the supplements that you want, but you're not going to absorb them the same way as you would when your nervous system is in a balanced state. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of those.
I mean, there's a lot, right? When we get done with a call, I think it's really important that, there's a lot of people out there that talk on these topics, right? And, when I'm looking to work with somebody, I want to know that they actually do what they're saying to do, right? And if you ask any of my players, and I know you've worked with some of my players and my clients, and obviously, I've known you since I want to take a little kid, right? Because that's kind of, you're in chiropractic college, and, I got to mentor you, and I've got to see you blossom into this amazing human being and just this like awesome practitioner. But my guys know that I'm never going to ask them to do, and my ladies, anything that I'm not willing to do myself. And so in my house, like, I've got visualization of phenomenal athletes around the world or people in history, because I think it's important, that genetic component of greatness. I've got things like a due to her skateboard that takes me back to the memory of the why. Plus, I love skateboarding and doing extreme sports. But like, these are things that I personally do in my own life that helps me stay at my highest state. So I'll take you into my recovery room. I've got a hyperbaric chamber. I've got PMF, pulse electromagnetic field, and we'll talk about all this here in a second. I've got a TheraAir, Nano Air technology. We've got the portable sauna. I've got a cold plunge in my house. I've got a TheraPro mat with near far infrared and red light. I've got red light. So I don't just talk about, hey, use these tools because it's cool, right? I genuinely use them because they work, and you just have to know how to work them. And there's a lot of recovery centers around the world that are opening up, and they're like, hey, we've got all this stuff, it's a la carte. And one of the blessings I've had is having Dave Asprey as a mentor and a friend, and other people in our industry of this biohacking world. And the biggest person who's influenced my life recently over the last year and a half, 2 years, is Robbie Besner from Therasage and Melody. And like, they literally took me from what I would say is almost like a yellow belt, and now like working on getting there to the black belt, right? And through our connections of really understanding these things and using them, being able to advise people like, hey, this is the best thing for you. And it's not always the most expensive thing out there. And real quick, before we talk about modalities, I think it's important to let's talk about a few quick tips that are simplistic, that don't cost you anything. Can we do that? Because I think this is just really important, because there are, right now we're in a country of inflation. I know that people are stressed financially. And so I often say, look, like, if you can't afford this, here are the things that you can do. Can you at least do these 4 things for me? Number 1, can you move? Like, can you get outside? Can you walk? Can you at least get some type of movement in? Can we try to get that metabolic heart rate up a little bit? Number 2, cold showers. Get a bowl, fill it with ice, put your hands in it, put your face in it, take a cold shower. And I'll talk about some of the science behind some of these things in a minute, but I'm like, that doesn't cost anything. Maybe a little bit for the ice, right? If you don't have an ice maker, that's fine. Number 3, can you breathe? And even if you take a start at like box breathing, 4 in, hold 4 in, out 4 in, hold 4 in, you know what I mean? do a box style, or do the 6-6 that I just talked about, making sure you're seating up. Can you, and then the fourth one is, can you at least look at your diet? Like, cut out the crap from the outside of the, and the inside of the aisles, go on the outside of the grocery store. If you're going for that, Starbucks, can you go for a water with electrolytes? If you're going for fast food, can you at least try to eat something fresh, or, red meat or whatever it is, depending on what their body style might like. Those are the four things that I tell people as an athlete. Even, parents are always like, what can my kid do? What can my kid get? And I'm like, number one, just get the basics. Can you just get the basics? Now we'll go into the advanced talk. Because I think it's really, important that people know, like, yeah, you got to invest in your health. And there's a lot of companies out there, I was just at A4M, right? And it's a longevity conference, and you walk down these aisles and it's like, everybody's got a thing now. And, I'm the UN. I always tell people, I'm like, if I find a product that's better than your product, I'm probably going to use your product. Or if I find a product that's, that I want to go play with, I'm going to go play with it. So you brought up cold plunging, and I think it's one of the things that my dad was special forces in the military, and growing up, like, it was just part of our regiment. Like, he would wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning, throw ice water on me, and be like, "Get up! Your alarm went off, and you're not up." And he'd throw me off the boat, like off the Sanibel, and make me swim in, and like, so to me, cold exposure has been a part of my life. And so even as a kid, like, my dad would have ice, and he'd be like, all right, let's get in there, you gotta tough it out, you gotta fight it, you gotta do this. And then in high school and college, and then chiropractic school and everything else, I continued to cold plunge. But it wasn't really until a few years ago that I learned how to use the cold plunge for my nervous system. Like, because I constantly fought it, right? Like, I got in and I was like, I can do this. But I never set an intention around why I was doing it. And when we look at the study of, like, speaking to water molecules, and I can't think of the scientist's name right now, but everybody knows the study.
Emoto?
Yeah, Emoto. So you yell at one and you say love to the other, right? And you see the chemical structure, the sharpness of this one, and the beauty of this one, right? And that quantum physics geometric side. And so as I started to get into the side of cold plunging, it was like, okay, instead of, like, ramping my nervous system up, which I didn't need because I was going through a ton of stuff at that time, everything else, I'm like, how do I calm my nervous system? And that's really through, like, breathwork and everything else, started teaching. I'm like, okay, so when we get people into our cold exposure at their clinic or my house, or if I'm coaching them online, I'm like, number one, we are not doing heavy, fast breathing. Zero. Now, there'll be a time for that, right? Like, if I've got to get you to have a breakthrough and I can't get there anywhere else, I have to put your body into stress. This is how Navy SEALs work. This is how, my dad, PJs, this is how they get to a response of being able to go past the limit. So I may take you into a more heavy excitation breath and really stress your system and throw you in there. But instead, I'm like, how do I regulate and calm you into a situation to where you can set an intention about the moments that you're going to spend in there, that you can put joy, love, excitement, forgiveness, and really take that time that you're stepping into here to catch your breath. Once you catch your breath, you can do anything. So, oftentimes we'll get an athlete in there, and, I have them set an intention. They're on grounding rocks, because grounding is really important. They step into the cold exposure. They get down. Water goes over the neck. Arms are in. And a lot of times you see their eyes dilate. They go into, fight or flight. They want to get out. They think they're dying. And they're in heavy breathing. And then we just calm them down. And I've got different sound bowls that we use with different parts of, like, the chakra regions and heart and everything else and head, that we can now start to stimulate from a frequency standpoint. But we'll keep that out for a second. Once we catch that breath, now I can get them into a Zen state. I can get them into a flow state. I can get them into a performance state. How that regulates and returns in once they step out of there is, often I hear from, wives of my guys, man, they're not reacting like they used to. Or I hear from their coach, or they'll call me after a big game and they're like, holy cow, like, I got back to that moment. Because once we set that moment into the brain, it's there. You have access to it. And so once we can teach that, Then they come out, we get them calmed down, and they have a shiver response. Now, there's two different philosophies here. Like shiver response, go in the sauna. If you're working through trauma and you're really trying to expand where you want to be, have the shiver response as long as possible. You want that regulation because you want to get that out. Now, if we're trying to contrast or we're trying to do something to where we're trying to stimulate healing or moving energy or moving blood, yeah, go get into hot exposure, come back, go, hot, come back and go. But then you can actually use your cold exposure as a training tool. Like I say, okay, great. Like we start people at 2 minutes at 33 degrees or 34 degrees. And I have it that cold for that nervous system regulation. How quickly can I get them to calm down and catch their breath? Then I have a whole program that I put together where, they dunk their head at the end. Then the next one, they dunk their head in the beginning, they dunk their head at the end. Then we go every 30 seconds. Then we go every time they catch their breath. Then we do breath holds underwater. Then we do, so there's a lot of things that you can start to play with these modalities to help continue to grow that athlete and that human being in their soul. So that's a little on cold exposure, and there's different temperatures, right? Like if you look at like the actual statistics of what Huberman and Stanford and all these guys are talking about, if you get 11 to 12 minutes in your cold exposure a week, it's going to help out with spike proteins, brown fat, all these other things. What I tell people is get in, catch your breath, even if it's 30 seconds sometimes. There'll be a time in the middle of the day when like I'm going, and I'm stressed. I'll go throw on my trunks, get in, just catch just get that breath response, catch it, get out, change, go back to what I'm doing. So it's kind of like a cup of coffee, right? So you're creating that you're playing with the hormonal effect, whether it's dopamine, epinephrine, serotonin. So you really get to have fun with these things. So that's cold exposure.
Well, I liked how you mentioned like you can use it for different periods of time for different effects, right? Like you can go do like a short plunge after a game and just kind of cool the system down and kind of cool any giant inflammation, but maybe not like as long as you would do 2 days after an injury where you're really trying to work with it or you're trying to work with the nervous system in a different way. So all of these little nuances are what become the art of training resiliency and making the body able to handle a variety of situations.
Yeah, and I think the thing too is there's a lot of cool research coming out right now. Like hormones are effed in this country right now, let's just say the world, right? But when we have guys having lower T than our guys in the 70s, at their age had like 3 times it, that's a problem. And we've got to be careful when we're working in professional sports too, because you've got NSF, you've got WADA, you've got ASADA. And so like there's a ton of great things out there that a lot of these guys are afraid to take because they haven't paid for the stamp, right? But when you're looking at testosterone, there's some really cool research right now, if you're using cold exposure, is to get in the cold exposure prior to working out. So now you're stimulating, you're getting that response, now you're getting that muscle response, and that's actually helping create, and then, it boosts everything else. So let's move into, heat. I think heat's a really big one to talk about for a second. And there's different types of heat, right? There's obviously like saunas, there's dry, there's wet, there's infrared, there's near, there's far, and then there's the talk of like electromagnetic fields and EMFs. And so, I mean, this is like a starting call for us today, but I think these are just things I want to start on for you. To me, the hotter the better, and being able to control your breath, again, it's coming down to breath, everything that we're going to talk about today, is because you can go into a sauna and try to fight for an hour at 150 or 170. But like, I'm like, why would we do that? So I tell people, I'm like, okay, if you can, the best thing in the world, and I am going to back Therasash on this. That's how I fell in love with their company, is their portable sauna is one of the best things I've ever been a part of and use every day. And everybody that I know, I get one for as a gift, and I promote it heavy. Because number one, I can put it on an airplane. I take it on the road. It pulls out within like 5 minutes. You can have your head out. So if you don't want to heat up your head and get a Hertz reaction, sometimes when you're working with somebody that's got a disease or dysfunction, it's got 2 red light panels with the tri-lights in it. So you're getting quality red light with 3 different frequencies while you're in the sauna. And you can heat it up to 170 in 15 minutes. Or you can go sit inside with like a yoga mat or a yoga chair. And now you're in a closed environment. You're getting red light on the whole entire body. And it's near and far infrared with low EMF. So for a tool that everybody can have in their house for under $1,000, I'm like, that's one of your go-tos. Like, don't even think about it. Just do it. Try it for 30 days. Trust me, right? Um,
And I just want to tell people, like, one of the cool things about sauna that I love is it induces something called heat shock proteins. So it will literally induce your body to start refolding damaged dysfunctional proteins. So sauna and heat therapy can actually help correct dysfunctional proteins in the body.
100%. And then you stack it, right? So now I'm going to bring in some stacking. So, you've got wet saunas, which I love steam saunas. I really do. And I think they have a massive benefit, but finding a quality one and, that you can have on a consistent basis is kind of hard. And then dry saunas are really, really good, especially if you can get them up into that 185, 200 mark. Because, if you're working with somebody with chronic disease like Lyme disease, autoimmunity, things like that, like bacterial, Bartonella, all these co-infections. Germany's kind of the leader on heat, medicine. And so we can't do some of the stuff that in the US yet that they're doing overseas. But basically they're wrapping that body up and they're getting it as hot as it can because these spirochetes, all these different things can't live in that extreme environment. And now all of a sudden they come out and then we can use supplementation, things like that to get it out. But going back to athletic world, sorry, I have a
No, I
passion for
love
that.
that.
Um,
All of this applies to
yeah,
everyone. People have weird infections they don't know about all the time, no matter your
we
status.
catch it. Um, and so then we're looking at like near and far infrared. It's really important to understand, like, okay, what are you putting your body onto and around? Because, if you're trying to go deep, if you've got an organ problem, if we've got a visceral response, these are all things you want to think about when you're looking and working with a modality. So to me, I think sauna is massive. And if you can't do that, what can you do? Go outside and get in some sunlight, right? So again, I'm always going to give the other thing that you can do if you can't get to these things or do these things. The next one that is so important for athletics and athletes and just human performance is oxygen. And the more that I dive into nano air and I look at these different products, and there's different products in the market. But I'm using the TheraAir currently, and it's basically like, and I was gonna have it on here while we're talking, but it's a little loud, so I didn't want to like interfere with like the actual like recording. But I use it when I meditate. I use it when I'm sometimes like what I'll do in the morning because I want to get my like devotion on my reading. You know, I'll get in my Therasage with and put my hands out with the zippers and I'll put the TheraAir on me. So now I'm getting oxygen, nano restructured, oxygen through here. It's like rainforest, the most clean, pure form of air you're going to get. And it helps with that folding of the proteins as well. So now think about this. And you're getting quality oxygen, you're getting sauna, you're getting red light, all in one stack. And so, you only need 15 to 20 minutes of this to get that photobiomodulation stimulated. And now that like efficiency for whatever you're going to try to go do and accomplish. Or I'll lay on my PMF mat, which is pulse electromagnetic field therapy. And if anybody knows me, I'm a massive fan of PMF. And there's such a spectrum of tools out there in PMF. Basically, PMF is just electromagnetic energy coming from the earth. So when you're grounding, you're getting PMF. When you are, near a rock quarry or you're out in Sedona, you're getting PMF, right? So these are natural forms of that electromagnetic field that's stimulating your cell to be able to vibrate and heal and function at its best level. So there's low Gauss systems, and then there's high Gauss systems. And when it comes to PMF, a lot of times people think like, I've got to have that jolt. And I was one of these people for a long time because I'm a massive fan, and I'll just straight up say it. Pulse centers, their systems changed my life. And, I think they're some of the best systems out there. Their XL Pro, I can change 9 different frequencies so I can stimulate different parts of the nervous system. My power output can be really, really good. And then I can start to almost play that musical instrument. So if a guy's stressed out or he just had a big game, I can put it on 7.0 or 7.8, bring him down that regulation for about 20, 30 minutes, then charge him up a little bit and then send him out. If I got another guy who's coming in, he's exhausted, I'm like, okay, 4.0, 5.0, charge the body up, get that cellular energy up, then have them go perform. If I've got someone who's injured, I can take it to 2.5, we can go deeper. So again, it's like learning how to master the craft that's in front of you or the tool that's in front of you. Then you have guided PMF, which I'm just now getting into, and I'm really freaking loving it. And there's two systems that I'm playing with. One's Electrons Plus, and then the other one's EQ. And there's these two. And so what it is basically, as a practitioner or someone who has one at home, or if you're an athlete, I can now take that PMF through my body, and I can go through the body. And as I'm feeling the body, it's almost like the body kicks back. And so I'm finding ways and areas of the body that I wasn't able to see prior to having this tool. And so now we can actually restructure, reformulate, and reorganize the nervous system, the brain, the tissue, the cells, and actually get the body to function better. And then the other part of it's low Gauss, right? So you've got different types of mats out there. And I use the TheraPro every day, and it's got low Gauss PMF. So it's using rose quartz, natural forms of electromagnetic fields. There's 9 frequencies. So we've got, the number one I get from all my players when I get them this mat is they're like, dude, I've never slept better in my life. And they get on the P1. We have the red light on, and I have my whole formulas that I'm writing right now from a temperature standpoint. And so, I get them hot, and then I get the PMF on, and then I give them a meditation list too, and they crash. They're like, dude, I've never slept that well in my life. Or we can get into a focus setting. There's a, inflammation recovery setting. And it's like, and then you got a stim unit. So like in that PMF side, you've got all that. So if you're looking at PMF on how to improve yourself, number one, start small. Get like a PMF, mat, and just try to, have it start. Number two, if you want to get more serious and you want to perform, look at high Gauss systems. Look at, self-guided. Reach out to practitioners. Reach out to me. Like, I'm in the process of launching an education platform on these type of things that we're talking about to teach practitioners and coaches and athletes how to use them. So PMF's a massive thing for me. Every single day, I don't think you can overdo it. You can dehydrate yourself, so make sure you're staying hydrated. You've got electrolytes, you've got the proper nutrition, and then hyperbaric, right? Like, hyperbaric's a hard one for me with a lot of people because it is hard to get to, and it can be expensive. And a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to this recovery center and I'm doing their hyperbaric, and I'm like, okay, how long are you in there, and how many times are you doing it? Like, this is a big key thing with hyperbaric, guys. You have to get 40 sessions within 60 days if you really look at the science and the research behind the change by utilizing hyperbaric. And then what hyperbaric are you going into? If it's a soft shell, you're probably only going to get to 1.5 or 1.6 ATA, which is 1 atmosphere. And you're going to have saturated oxygen, meaning that you have refiltered oxygen that's coming through. If you've got a major disease or we've got a major injury, we've got to go to a 2 or a 3 or a 4 atmosphere with 100% oxygen, and that's got to be monitored. So again, when you're looking at hyperbaric medicine or hyperbaric performance, there are things you got to think about. And number two, a lot of times my athletes are claustrophobic. So, and these are big studs, right? Or like amazing females that can do anything, but they're like, I don't want to get into that. It looks like a coffin. Or I don't want to get into that. You know what I mean? It's just uncomfortable. Or they can't clear their ears, and they can't, pressurize. So those are two things that keep me from being able to use that tool. Well, now that I found nanotechnology and I'm using the TheraAir and I'm using that oxygen, we can almost replace that part of the tool in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of cool research coming out around it. So you don't have to do that hyperbaric side of it. But if you can, do hyperbaric 40 sessions within 60 days. And I know it's a commitment, but if you can do it, that's where the true science shows, where that cellular change happens, where you can actually start to reverse disease and disease, and heal, pretty much a lot of things that are going on.
I love how you talked about all of those, and everything you said is so spot on. Like there's so many different ways to use these, and this is exactly why I wanted to talk to you about this stuff. And you and I could talk about this for days and go significantly deeper. So if you guys are interested in this stuff, like comment below when we post this, ask us questions, and we can always talk about this more, because the whole point is doing it for you guys so you really understand how to use your bodies. Because I think something a lot of people, and especially athletes, run into is sometimes they're just told like, here's a bunch of stuff to do, but nobody really trains them to think of how. So even going back to the cold plunge that you mentioned, right? Like you can have a cold plunge with one person in one mindset and one person in a different mindset for the exact same amount of time, in a completely different chemical outcome inside their body because of where their brain was at. or like how fast their breath was. So if you can start to train people to understand why they're doing it and what they're doing with different modalities, that is what creates sustainability and how you can react based on where you are, what's available, and what your body just went through. But I think if you have an understanding of it, your chemistry literally changes just from your brain's understanding of it, because your brain is the most powerful chemistry you'll ever have. So thank you so much for touching on all of those. And I think this leads perfectly kind of into like, in using all of these, how does this foster resilience in the body so that we can start to do things that we never even thought we might be able to do, kind of that limitless potential aspect of things?
So, so I'm working on a whole program around that right now, and
Right.
I love it. I love that you push this. I truly, and I can just say this now with 100% confidence, that we are limitless, and I truly believe this. And we just have to, number one, get past our limiting beliefs, and they can be stored from when we were a kid. We touched an oven, somebody told us we weren't good enough, we had an expectation that didn't get met, and so all of a sudden now we're in a different state of mind. Getting that mindset right first is really important. So having your mission, vision, and principles of who you are, this MVP process, right? And I've learned that from my buddy Brian Kane, and my partner Michael Kowalski. He does a lot of the coaching side of what we do. So you got to get that down first. And then number two, understanding, like, I don't like the word recovery. Like, and I've told you this for years. I always say, like, I love the word resilience. And it's because you have to understand adaptation. And you're not always trying to recover. Like I tell my players all the time, there may be a time that I'm not using this for, quote, recovery. This is still training. So if we're in this constant mindset of like, oh, I'm looking at my Whoop score, I'm looking at my Oura ring, I'm looking at my BioStrap, I'm looking at my Apple Watch data. I'm like, sometimes we've got to also go with that intuition, subjective feeling data, because if we're just constantly stressed about our number and we're not looking at this pattern over time, now we fall into a false state almost of where we're at. And so I tell people, I'm like, resilience happens when we find out where your baseline is. Once I know your baseline, now I know if we're improving or if we're degrading. And we can track that over a season and an off season and then a preseason, back to season. You know what I mean? Also, what I love is like when I've got an athlete from the start, right? So now I've got kids that are now turning pro, but I've got their data over years. And we've got their ability to see. So when something happens, like when I was with Greg Rose at TPI, and with On Base U, one of the things that I'm very proud of our companies for is, number one, the integrity of how we assess, and then more importantly, the data that we get. So when an athlete would come into TPI or On Base U, we would take them through a full screen. We'd video it. We'd measure it. We'd take them through strength testing. We'd put them on our motion capture system. Then we would go ahead and we would break all that down, and we say, look, you have a physical limitation, you have a motor control, you have a strength, you may have a power, and then here's your coaching side. Now, if they're throwing amazing or they're having the best season on the PGA, our goal is to get them there as quickly as possible so we can get the data of how they're moving and figure out the why and what of what they're doing. So now if something happens, we can bring them back, put them on, and now we can compare. So when you look at the human body, there's a million infinite number of ways to move, but there's one efficient way for everybody to move, every athlete, every human, every soul, based on what they can physically do. And so I tell people all the time, I'm like, look, I'm your sniper. This is how we build resilience. I've got to teach you how to assess yourself physically on a consistent basis. So I teach them a wide squat, a lunge extension test for a pitcher. I teach them a 90-90 arm. I teach them internal rotation from the hip. Basic, simple ways of looking, right? Then I look at their subjective data. There's some type of quiz or ask, to get them to kind of open up and like where they're at, what they're thinking, what they're doing. And then from there, I know, and then you can look at their heart rate, you can look at their other data, but I know if resilience is happening or not. Because number one, if they're not getting better and we're prescribing X, we've got a problem. They're not in recovery, they're in stress. So that's not resilience, that's panic. So if we can bypass that, now I'm like, hey, dude, let's do a couple quick, let's just take about 5 minutes to get into breath. Cool. Now let's get into some visualization. Cool. Now let's get into some movement. Cool. Let's retest. Maybe this was a stress response. Now we're into resilience. Now we bypass that. Now I can say, okay, great. These are the areas you got to go attack. Tonight, I want you to get on your red light mat for an hour with PMF. I want you to heat the body up as much as you can handle, but don't overdo it. Then, when you wake up in the morning, I want you to make sure you do this breath pattern based on what they're doing. Now we're working resilience. So we're training the body in adaptation of where they are to where they're going. It's not this cookie cutter, I'm going to go to the same place every day. I'm going to go do a cold plunge. I'm going to go do the sauna. I'm going to go maybe jump in this. I'm going to try this new toy. Resilience happens when you have the ability to adapt to your environment that allows you to expand your greatest consciousness. And so when you use these tools and you start to really understand them, that's where ultimate performance happens. That's where you become blessed in ways that you would have never imagined.
I am so glad that you brought it up, that like it's just not cookie cutter. Like I feel like a lot of things are trending and happening right now and people are learning about them, and it's like, oh yes, everyone, all the time, every day. Not necessarily. And I feel the exact same way about nutrition with people. So, a lot of people will be like, oh, you have a food sensitivity to this food, like never eat it. My approach to it is, well, what part of your immune system is activated? How many parts are activated? Which ones are more activated? Okay, maybe avoid this one for like 3 months, let your immune system turn over, and then you can kind of start to bring it back in. And I want you to rotate, and I want you to do food seasonally, and also eat foods differently before your game and eat foods differently after your game. And I want to teach you how to realize when your body has had an inflammatory response, because food sensitivities and things like that change for people over time. So if you get injured in a game and you're dealing with an injury and you're eating the same thing all the time, you can actually develop a sensitivity to that thing. So I try to help people understand and be like, well, did you wake up and like your eyelids were puffy, or that joint pain that you have kind of flared up? It might mean that you need to review something that you consumed in the last few days. And working with athletes on how to do this stuff on the road, I think, is incredibly important. And not only knowing what to do, but also alternatives that you can do when you're faced with certain situations, because that's more realistic for people. It's not realistic to just tell people to like stop doing something entirely or only do this. So, and we didn't even dive into nutrition in this. Like everything that we talked about are just tools that you can use at home, but food as medicine first is always my approach. And there's like even little things you can do for balancing your hormones, like while traveling, like making sure that you get sunrise and sunset light without sunglasses can actually start to reset your circadian rhythm and help with jet lag and help with hormonal regulation and cortisol and all these different things. So I'm sure we could continue talking about this forever, but thank you so much for being here today. If people wanted to learn more about you or learn more from you or work with you, where would you send them?
So there's a couple of different ways. I'm restructuring how I'm going to be working with people. So I'm actually helping Therasage and Robbie Besner and Melissa Knorr. We're launching a thing called Thera Optimal Health. And a lot of people in our world have kind of heard about it, but we're about to really put this out. We've got the best faculty from all over the world in all these different areas that you're going to want to go into. I'm going to be running our optimal health performance side. So all of the protocols that I'm talking about, all the things that I'm designing, or the people that I work with or collaborate with, you're going to be able to get that information there. So like you're going to be able to take a course on understanding cold plunging or cold exposure, or direct cold exposure or intentional cold exposure. And now you're going to be able to go through and say, okay, based on how I am, what do I want to do today? And like have the subjective AI database backing. So it's going to have your health buddy. So that's going to be really cool. So look up Thera Optimal Health, like them on Instagram, follow. We have our first beta testers going through it right now, and we're getting a lot of really good feedback. So there's going to be principal and there's going to be advanced classes and then advanced courses. Personally, Dr. Sean Drake, obviously here on Instagram with you. Athlete Chiropractic, Athlete Empowered is the overall brand. I'm kind of rebranding to Athlete Empowered because I think that's where we start, is in the empowerment side, and then go out from there. Breath Energy Studio, Breath.Energy Studio is the breathwork studio I look at. I do want you guys to follow them because I think that, you know, it's a unique studio. It is, you know, it's got some great things. Follow Titleist Performance Institute on Base U, Racket Fit, you know, FMS, Selective Functional Movement Systems. These are things that I continue to like work with, support, love. If you're looking to get into pro sports, I'm telling you right now, following Dr. Greg Rose, you know, Dave Phillips, you know, these are the guys that changed my life. You know what I mean? And I want to give credit back to them. I think it's really important. And then you can always reach out to me, you know, through Christine or, you know, obviously on Instagram, you know, reach out to the office, you know, at our clinic. And then stay tuned for a lot of really cool stuff that's going to happen because this is the first of many calls. I can't believe it's already been an hour. You know, this is going to be a first of many calls that we're going to have. You know, I'm bringing Christine into the sport world right now, into a very unique sector. And so I'm really excited to see what she's going to be able to do with that and what we're going to do together. That's going to help all of you. Because at the end of the day, you know, I tell people, I'm like, when you step in my clinic, I want zero ego. I don't care if you're, you know, a $400 million athlete and you're driving a Rolls Royce, or you're a mom that's taking care of 3 kids. To me, you're a human being. And when you come to my clinic, I introduce that mom to that $300 million athlete, or grandma to that, you know, pro pitcher or golfer. So at the end of the day, remember, I don't care who you are and what you do. What I care about is what's inside you and how can we express that to be the best it can possibly be. So as we continue to do this, I hope that we get to inspire you guys to do that. And yeah, thanks, Christine. Love you.
Oh, absolutely. No, thank you. Love you too. Love chatting with you. And, you know, everything that we've talked about today, Sean and I work in what's called the vitalistic model. And it's very much about how do we find everything that's right with you and bring it out, rather than how do we find everything wrong with you and suppress it. So thank you so much for taking the time today. And I look forward to future talks, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. Cheers.